Today, we're talking with Celeste Headlee. You may know her as longtime reporter and host on NPR and PBS. She's a best-selling author, and she's an expert on communication and conversations. So she's exactly who we want to be talking to right now, and I think you're really going to enjoy this one. I'm over the moon excited to be interviewing you, and also really intimidating because you're the guru, and this is my new job as of 5 weeks ago. So,
well, congratulations on your new job, and if nothing else, if you're talking to a conversation expert, you know it's going to go fine.
Well, doing my homework, I think all I have to do is listen, and I think I'm okay. So, I'm feeling confident.
Correct. Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah. So it's one of my many hats, I guess. I guess it's not a new job. I'm still running CommonAlly. It's just I'm running it out of my living room, and I am running interviews, which is new to what we do. But
I think a lot of people are rethinking what they can do, which I think is positive. I think it's good to sort of think about other ways to get the message out in an organization, right?
It feels like this pause or whatever this is that we're living in is kind of a reevaluation of how we were living before. So I see it as a welcome gesture, even though it's scary and there's a lot of uncertainties that come with it.
Yeah. I mean, literally, that's what I just wrote. The new book that just came out in March, that's literally what it's about. I was literally saying, I obviously didn't know this was coming, but I was literally saying, we need a reset.
Yeah.
We need to stop and take some account of what exactly is happening. So again, I did not bring on the pandemic.
I don't know. I think we found the source. No. I'd like to talk to you about the concept of overwork. Obviously, that's something that all of us are kind of facing, and I think it's being exposed a little more now. I myself have a 5-year-old. My wife is working from home. We're all trying to manage that, and I'm seeing it out of body a little bit, where like I notice I'm working much later and at different hours, and that I can't really be present, and I've always struggled with that, but I feel like that's been even more so now. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, work-life balance was already completely out of whack before the pandemic. There was already too much a blurring of those lines, and now, first of all, people in general were not prepared to work from home, and by that I mean they hadn't set up the firm boundaries and limitations that they needed. So there's a couple things you absolutely have to have if you're going to work from home in a sustainable and healthy way. Number one is you need a starting time and a quitting time. And most people are not doing that right now.
So 7 a.m. to 3 a.m. is not, that doesn't.
Nope.
Okay, good.
Doesn't work. And then the other one is that you have to have a designated workspace. And everywhere else in your house is no-go for work. So the temptation to pick up your laptop and just work from the patio or work from the kitchen, that has to be resisted. You have to create a workspace. And when you're taking a work call, you go to that workspace. And when you're done with the work call, you go back to the rest of your living space. There's a reason sleep doctors, if you're having trouble sleeping with insomnia, they will tell you that you need to make sure all you're doing in the bed is sleeping. You may have heard this before, yeah. Because you have to train your mind that when you get into bed, it's time to sleep. Well, it's kind of the same concept with this, that you need to train your mind that your home is for living. And here's this space that I go to when I need to work. And when I leave it, I am done working.
How do you get your mind to shut off? Like, I understand the physicality of it, and like, okay, these are the boundaries. Daddy's going in his room. I have a call. When I'm out, I'm dad. How do you do that when your brain is not really there? Because I feel like I'm still processing what I was working on. There might be some sort of deliverable that comes from what you just did with work. How do you compartmentalize that when you come back into a different environment?
Yeah, it's interesting. Psychologists say that we're all of us at all times are in a state of absent presence. And that's partly because we have smartphones and screens distracting us all the time. So whatever you may think about your smartphone, it's really distracting your brain. Just the sight of it. We have research studies showing that just a smartphone sitting on the table that belongs to neither person, for example, and that makes no noise, makes those two people having a conversation 60 to 70% more likely to say the other person is untrustworthy and unempathetic. We know that if you're the type of person that leaves your email inbox open on your computer all the time, even if it's in the background and you're not looking at it, your brain is still thinking about it since it's open and preparing to react and respond. And your IQ, therefore, drops by 10 to 12 points because that's so difficult for your brain to multitask like that. To try to multitask, I should say.
Yeah.
So part of the problem is that you've been doing this for so long that you're now in the habit of being absently present. But it's also because you're carrying those distractions with you all the time. So if you really want to get out of the habit, then you need to keep your smartphone and your laptop out of sight. Put them in a drawer. Even if they're going to ring or whatever it may be, put them someplace where you can hear them but not see them.
Yeah. I think people who traditionally have a 9 to 5 and go to an office and now find themselves at home because of quarantine, I'm imagining that's a bigger culture shock. And is it too early to start seeing like data and case studies come out of this? Where are we seeing a different future when we come out of this in relation to like
Yeah,
overwork?
it's, as you probably know, case studies take a very, very long time. And so it's much too early. Also, the other thing about case studies at this point is that they would all be self-reported.
Mhm.
And from what I've seen, self-reported data is really, it's not reliable. We have a very diluted sense of our work habits and
Yeah.
our daily habits, right? So I don't know if it could be permanent. I will say that even among startup cultures, and you probably know this already, there's a real backlash against the long work hours. And one of the reasons, I mean, one of the most important components of the book is the data and the statistics, because it feels like putting in long hours makes us more productive and helps us get through our to-do list. That, of course, it feels like that makes perfect logical sense. But when you actually study it and track it, people who work more than 50 hours a week are the least productive,
Yeah.
the least,
Yep.
because you reach a point of uh, of no return, right? You reach the point of diminishing returns, at least, where your brain starts making errors. It's distracted. It's going to take you an hour to write a memo that would have taken you 15 minutes while you were fresh and still able to focus. So, yeah, I think that everybody's sort of having a transition problem. I think for some it's going to be easier than others. And I think that there are people right now who are anxious. They want things to go back to exactly what they were like before. I
Yeah.
think that's true. However, there are the rest of us who have suddenly come to face with the fact that our habits were toxic.
Yeah.
And so they got to change. And I think people are willing to figure out what happened, how did I get here,
Yeah.
and how do I get away from it.
I think so too. I'm seeing that with a lot of conversations I'm having, both with family, friends, colleagues, and through this series of that willingness is there. I don't think it was right in the beginning. I think there was that fight, within to be like, I want to go back to comfort land. But now that people have settled into this and kind of, maybe not perfected it, but figured out where they live within the scenario, I think they are adapting, and to me, that's really interesting. And I almost feel like maybe this is the cynical side of me, but I feel like we kind of have to be forced into things before we actually do make change sometimes, and that's not going to come from government and a democracy. That's not going to come from something that's bad, like that you've manufactured. But when something that is out of our control forces us into a new pattern, I think it's a little bit easier to adapt that. And I don't know. That's again not scientific, not a case study. That's just what I observing. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably true just on a gut level. I don't know of any.
Mhm.
I'm sure there are studies, but I don't know of them that back it up. But I think also, I mean, what I found is that at the very beginning, I mean, I think my book had maybe 3 days before the world shut down, 3 days of a book tour. And I did get pushback from people who were like, "This is ridiculous. There's no way you could have people go home from work or like quitting time or all those kind of things." And I was like, "It really isn't ridiculous. It's totally possible." And really tragically, I was proven right in the worst way
Yeah.
possible. But I think that if nothing else, what's happening has proven that pretty dramatic changes can occur. We can do it.
Hmm.
I mean, there is that tiny bit of hope out there that it may feel like what the way things were was always the way they were done, but that doesn't mean they're always the way they have to be done.
Yeah, good point. With the book, like I want to talk about that for sure. I also want to talk about has it changed? Just that just reminded me of the way you would do a book tour or promote a book. Obviously, like the subject matter of your book is it's got to be so eerie just on your end. But what
It
has that been
is.
like to then go out and talk about the book and like try to promote that? Did it change the whole strategy for doing that?
I mean, in literal terms, I can't do a regular book tour,
Of
right? I
course.
can't be making all these appearances. I can't do book signings. All that stuff is canceled. Um, I've been doing virtual events, and people are anxious. I mean, you can feel their anxiety
Hmm.
coming through the screen, right? I mean, you can feel how fraught their lives are right now. And then that's all wrapped up in this guilt over the fact that they are anxious and stressed out, and yet they're healthy,
Hmm.
right? So they shouldn't be complaining because there's other people who are suffering worse. It is an odd thing uh to find so many people saying, how did this woman know? I literally watched an Instagram video of this woman reading a passage from my book, and then she ended by going, how did this woman know? And I'm like, I didn't. Did not know. Want to be
That's-
totally clear about that.
There's going to be
Yeah,
conspiracy theories all around now.
yeah, I guess so.
What was your
Yeah.
path to this? I mean, being an expert on conversations and communication, that's pretty unique in its own right. Like, what led you to the book and to just that path in general? Was there a catalyst to
Well, I
that?
mean, I've been a professional converser for over 20 years now, right?
Mhm.
Like that's what a host of a show is. And at heart, an interview is just a more formal type of conversation. But in terms of sort of like the pillars of what a good conversation is, an interview should have all of those things. Um, so I've been studying conversation for as long as I have been a journalist, which would be since 1999. Um, and that's what led to the first book. The second book, I mean, first of all, I had some lingering questions left over from the first book that were kind of percolating in my head. I had actually started writing a completely different book. Um, and then I started researching this subject just for myself, not for a book,
Yeah.
just to cure what was happening to me because I was so exhausted all the time and stressed and anxious and miserable and unhappy.
Hmm.
And I had to figure out why, because I for the first time in my life I had enough money, right? That was supposed to be
Yeah, that's
the
it. That's
solution.
yeah.
Right. So yeah, that it all started as a project just to fix myself, and then I realized it wasn't me, it was us.
Hmm.
And that's when it became a book project.
Okay, so it wasn't such a long-term thing. There was kind of a moment where that turn happened. That's interesting. What was the first what can you mention the 2 books? I just want everyone to hear the titles of them and know.
Sure. The first book is called We Need to Talk, How to Have Conversations That Matter. And the second book is called Do Nothing, How to Break Away from Overworking, Overdoing, and Underliving.
I'd love to get a couple takeaways from Do Nothing, because I also just don't wanna fill people with, like, this daunting feeling of, we're all in isolation. I want people to know there's solutions and that there's practices to kinda cope with where we are and to also be stronger once we are out of this. So do you have a few things from Do Nothing that you can, point out that would help people?
The first thing I would say is, I mean, if you're bored at home, if you're at home and you're like, I don't know, I don't have anything to do, that's not taking care of kids or taking care of pets or right, doing dishes, and you sit down and you're like, I what am I going to do with myself? Right. I'll just guess I'll just watch Hulu for the next 6 hours. There's a reason you feel that way. And it's that over the course of the past 50 years, we've steadily gotten rid of any hobby or activity that wasn't productive or didn't contribute to our work or our branding or our leveraging or whatever it may be. You know, people used to do needlework and whittle, and guys used to tinker in their garages. I'm saying guys because we're talking about like the 1950s and 60s.
I get it.
People used to do useless stuff that you can't sell on eBay or post on Pinterest. We used to have stuff to do, right?
Yep.
And then if we had this pandemic in the 1950s and everybody had to stay home, it would be a very different environment.
Yeah.
So this is a good time to start finding out who you are when you're not working. What is it that you like to do that's not connected to work and is not necessarily useful or productive? You know, there's plenty of that stuff. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that the solution to most of our anxiety problems, I'm not a medical doctor, so this is not meant to be medical advice, but for general anxiety and fatigue and exhaustion and the feeling of being overwhelmed, there's completely inexpensive, mostly free, simple solutions to that. We are biologically and evolutionarily primed to take almost immediate benefits and mood lifting from a walk in nature, looking at trees. You will find a difference in your heart rate and your cortisol levels almost immediately if you walk away from your screens. Like, the human body is an amazing thing, and so is the human brain. There are very simple ways to solve it. You don't have to take melatonin to go to sleep. There's better ways to fix your sleep. You don't have to take a mood lifter. Again, I'm not talking about someone who has been prescribed something.
Yes.
I'm talking about everybody else. You don't have to medicate that with booze or whatever else it may be. You can just take a walk with your dog.
Yeah.
Right. Or whatever it may be. And you're going to see benefit from that. So those are the two things I would say.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, we've been doing bike rides as a family lately, and just, masks on, the whole deal, but it's amazing. And I feel like the planet is doing that too. I feel like the planet is kind of like, thank you for not killing me for a month and just like rebounding to a certain extent. Hopefully that continues.
Yeah, I would love to see that. Although maybe if people see how quickly nature can rebound, because I bet for people, global warming felt like an intractable problem that they could not solve. And maybe if nothing else, this is showing people how quickly we really can make a difference.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by the whole environmental part of this. I want to transition just a little bit to talk about, you had mentioned the introversion and talking about stressful things. What is it about introversion and being an introvert in a time of quarantine, and why is it important to talk about stressful things?
So first, I want to give kind of a lengthy caveat, which is to say that there's a lot of people identifying as introverts right now who are not introverts. Introverts are quite rare. You sure you already know that Carl Jung was the one that first came up with the terms introversion and extroversion. The introverts and extroverts are at the extreme ends of the spectrum. The vast majority of humankind is in the middle. We're ambiverts. Sometimes we like being on a group of people. Sometimes we like being alone, and we can adapt. So introverts are rare, and it's you have to be careful about identifying it as an introvert when you're not one,
Mm-hmm.
because that becomes a very dangerous self-perpetuating vicious cycle, meaning that you say, I'm an introvert. It makes you less likely to go to social situations that can degrade your social skills, which means that when you do have a social interaction, it doesn't go as well as you'd like, which makes you more likely to say, I'm an introvert. And it's dangerous. It's because that makes you more isolated. Even before this pandemic, this was the loneliest. We had the records of loneliness that had never been seen before in history. Same with social isolation. And loneliness degrades your internal organs. It won't kill you directly, but it will lead to the diseases and illnesses that will kill you.
Mm-hmm.
Human beings need social interaction, and even introverts enjoy social interaction, and they need it. They may need shorter periods of social interaction, but they still need it. So for everybody, regardless of how you identify your personality, you need to make sure you're getting authentic social interaction. And social media doesn't count. It doesn't count.
Sorry,
because the brain doesn't recognize it.
Gotcha. Okay. Is that digital mediation? Or is that different?
Digitally mediated communication. That means texting, emailing. For the most part, the brain does not recognize that as authentic social connection, meaning it does not fulfill your innate need for belonging. Doesn't mean you may not enjoy it. It means that you have a need to belong that is satisfied by authentic social connection, a social connection in which you can hear a human voice.
Yeah.
And it is not satisfied by Twitter or Instagram or email or texting. It's just not. At one point, I asked a scientist if text could equal the effectiveness of the voice for communication at some point, and she said, "Yeah, maybe in like 2,000 or 3,000 years." So we haven't evolved that quickly. We still need to hear a human voice, and that's important for people to know. The other thing I would say about this is that it doesn't have to be Zoom. Some people are getting exhausted by Zoom. I get it.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a social connection through Zoom. You can just take the phone and use it as a phone, and that will be fine.
How do you do that? What's the button?
There's a little symbol that people may not recognize anymore.
Oh my God. Yeah. I will say about Zoom though, because I fought that forever. And now I feel that satisfaction when I call my friends, which, we don't talk on the phone that much. And now we are like through Zoom, and their connections are very real. And it feels like when we hang up, it's like, like I feel like I just hung out. And normally with technology, I saw that as a wall. And now I'm seeing it as an opening. And I don't know if that's just because we seek it out more because we can't have it or what, but I'm not seeing technology as a hindrance as I have in the past.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing inherently bad about technology. Technology is a tool, like any other tool. Human beings evolved to use tools. It's totally natural. It's not the tool itself that's the problem. It's the use of it. Now, that said, obviously, the software was designed to make you addicted to your electronics, and that's not great.
Yeah.
That means we have to be even more careful with our electronics because we're all on dopamine highs all day long, which is not good.
Yeah.
So you just have to be very wary about it. You don't have to toss your laptop in the East River. You just have to choose the times when you're going to get up and walk away, right? Do you really need to be on Twitter all day? I mean, that's an honest question because there's very few people who do. Very few.
Yeah.
You probably don't.
Yeah, I think you're right. The talking about stressful things part, I can understand why that is obviously beneficial all around, and just, being familiar with mental health and how to deal with that through conversation. Is there something else specific about why that's really important?
It's interesting. Open, honest communication is always preferable to vagaries. I'm a volunteer for the crisis text line, for example, and they tell you over and over that you don't want to ever use any kind of veiled language like, are you thinking of harming yourself? If you think someone's, for example, going to commit suicide, you say, are you thinking of taking your life? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing with anxiety. You don't want to say, how are you doing? You seem kind of wonky today, right? You need to say, hey, are you anxious? I'm anxious. I have trouble sleeping. I'm having weird nightmares.
Yeah.
Just come right out and say what you're talking about. And one of the reasons that's important is because we are not good at at knowing what's going on in other people's heads. We think we are.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, research has shown we vastly overestimate our ability to read other people's faces. So someone will make a face while you're talking to them, and you think you know why they made that face, and you're wrong.
Hmm.
And it's the same thing is true with what people are thinking about. So it is better, instead of to make assumptions about what other people are thinking or going through or experiencing or what their response might mean. What do you mean by that? It's better just to say, whoa, that sounded like you were judging me or thinking it's a bad idea for me to still be in sweatpants. Why do you say that? It is always better to get that stuff out. On the other hand, science is never a clear yes or no. Mm-hmm. We also have a lot of scientific evidence showing that venting does not accomplish a lot of benefit for you. A lot of people feel like if they're venting, it's a cathartic, right? They're getting it off their chest. But in fact, if what you're doing is not articulating something with a purpose, but just venting to vent, in fact, that increases depression and anxiety. It just reminds you of something. Your brain goes back and it will actually experience whatever that trauma was or pain was again, and talking about it will just continue to bring it up. So you have to sort of make sure that you are articulating and not venting.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. Yeah, I can imagine why it's easy to get into that trap too, because it does feel like therapy, but then at the end it's not. Sorry, I'm processing everything. I'm literally trying to be the best listener I possibly can. I've never done it to this extent. Speaking of listening, I know we have to go here soon, but for us, so CommonAlly, I don't know how familiar you are with us, but it's a civic tech platform to kind of strip the conversation, primarily amongst young people, of party and partisanship and even politicians, and really focus on issues that affect our lives, our everyday lives, and then how that plays a role in the greater community. So a lot of that work starts with conversation. And for young people who have typically a shorter attention span sometimes, what's your advice around listening and the importance of that? Because I think it's a vital tool. I think it's underused, and I don't know that people really know how to listen and internalize what they're getting.
You're correct on all those points. Listening is hard for human beings, right? That predates technology. It is difficult for us to truly listen in an active way. Some of the best research on listening goes back to the 1950s and 60s. And even then, when people listened to someone talk for 10 minutes, immediately after, they only retained 50%. And with a few weeks, it was all gone. So we're not great listeners, which is to say it's always going to be tough, right? It's always going to require effort to listen. However, we also know that listening to someone else's experiences is one of the best ways possible to increase your empathy.
Yeah.
It is one of the best ways to learn, because you would be surprised what other people know. It is one of the best ways to break yourself out of confirmation bias. Remember that human beings are the only species that suffer from confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is where you believe something and then someone shows you definitive proof that it's incorrect and it makes you believe it harder. We're the only species that suffers from that.
I've seen a lot of that
and
lately, yeah.
The way you get out of that is by respecting other people's expertise, right? Other people are your fact check.
Yep.
But during this period of time where we think that we're just a few Google searches away from knowing everything, our belief superiority, which is in fact a technical term, is through the roof. And so listening is one of the ways that you can check yourself before you wreck yourself, right? That's how you keep yourself in check. And it's good for you. We also have studies that show that your enjoyment of a conversation goes up the less you talk. Listening to other people is good for you on a biological sense, physiological, emotional, neurological. I mean, it's great. There's almost no downsides. But again, it will take effort.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. I wonder if that's why like the rise of podcasts are so successful. Like if there is something to that where you are listening the entire time. You're not having a conversation even on that. Well, thank you so much. I honestly I can sit here for another hour or so and more and just keep having this conversation. But I'm sure you have things to get back to as well. You're very busy. And I do want to give you an opportunity to first of all, if people out there haven't seen Celeste's TED Talk, it's amazing on listening. Please go look at that. And then where else can we direct people to the book and to anything else that you're working on?
I mean, the easiest thing is just to go to my website, celesteheadlee.com, because I try to keep that updated with all the things I'm working on. I'm not making a lot of appearances right now, but it has my other stuff, blogs and places to find the book and all those other things.
Okay, great. Well, Celeste, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And I can't wait to see this live.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks.